Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Down Syndrome 21st Perspectives. I'm Leigh Frillici. I'm here with my co-host, Ann Lewis.
Hello.
And we have a special guest for you today, Jillian Benfield.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're happy that you're here, Jillian.
So excited.
I know. You're a former TV journalist who at 27 received the diagnosis that her unborn child would be born with Down syndrome. And as Jillian says, it rocked her and her husband's world. She's chronicled this journey from disbelief and despair to healing of her own fearful perceptions in 2 books. Those books are called The Gift of the Unexpected and her newest book, Overwhelmed and Grateful. So Jillian, thanks for joining us. Yes, and we have the books right here.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Can you tell us a little bit about this journey and how it began? When you first got that diagnosis, you really explain it beautifully, painfully. So
my son is now 10. So this was, I guess, almost 11 years ago, where I was a TV journalist working in Augusta, Georgia. And then my husband was a dental student. And when he graduated dental school, the Air Force paid for him to receive further training through the Air Force. So it was an Air Force scholarship that he was able to go to dental school. So after he graduated, we were shipped out to Las Vegas, where we lived for 1 year. And I took the year off because we had just had our first child. And I thought I was going to go right back into TV news after that 1 year assignment. And lo and behold, we get the news that we are moving to Alamogordo, New Mexico, where there is not even a Target, let alone a TV station. Just for reference, it's where they tested the first atomic bomb. That is how, if you're not familiar with that area of the country. And so I was just so shocked and devastated feels like a strong word, but at the time that felt devastating. And then that very same day where we got that news, I found out that I was unexpectedly pregnant with our second child. So, you would think that's enough of a surprise. And then we moved to Alamogordo a couple of months later. And 8 days after we arrived, we figured out that there was something off on the ultrasound. And the doctor told us that it was looking likely that our child could have Down syndrome. Those test results were confirmed. And I had what I described in my first book, The Gift of the Unexpected, as the bathroom floor moment, where I was devastated. I was grief-stricken. I thought that this was the worst news we could have received. And a lot of what that first book is about is looking back at, well, why did I feel that way? Why was I so grief-stricken? Why? Because once he was born, I'm not going to say, oh, my ideas changed, my heart did begin to shift once he was born. And so the gift of the unexpected is about how the unexpected things that happen to us can help us deconstruct who we are and then reconstruct who we need to become. It's about the unbecoming that happens when something knocks us off our feet, like a diagnosis, and then the becoming that happens if we choose to walk all the way through it. And so, that's kind of the nitty gritty of the backstory. And here we are almost 11 years later, and we have moved to, I don't know how many states since then.
Jillian, let me ask you 2 questions about that. We found out when Fritz was born, and it was a surprise and a shock. And I felt like all the interviews I watched of you, I felt like, oh my gosh, you could be interviewing me because you're so raw and real and honest. And that's like that's hard to do because there are a lot of people out there that are saying, oh, it's a blessing and I wouldn't change it for the world and I'm the lucky few and all those things. And when you're going through it, you're thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I not fully feeling that way? But my question for you is, looking back, did you ever think to yourself, I would have rather not know and find out at birth? Or did you think there was an advantage to finding out when you were pregnant?
That's a good question. Well, I would say I wouldn't change it because for us, because we lived in such a remote area, they had to end up moving us before he was born. So we moved from New Mexico to Arizona three weeks before he was born. I mean, it was wild. It was absolutely wild. And so anyways, no, I wouldn't change it for me because there are some logistical things that can happen if you do get that prenatal diagnosis. But would I have gone through the process a little bit more differently if I had gotten a birth diagnosis? Who knows? Part of the reason I think that my grief was so thick, not all of it, but part of it was because of how that diagnosis was delivered. It was delivered as if it was a death sentence, and so I grieved as it was a death sentence. And so I had done some work with an organization called the Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network to try to help with doctors delivering unbiased diagnoses. And all of that to say, even if I had had a great diagnosis experience with the doctor, I still think for me, I would have gone through a level of grieving, and I think that it is disorienting when you are grieving a diagnosis like this and people only want to meet you with positivity. This is a blessing. They're always happy. What a gift.
Last night I go, why didn't we get the one that's always happy? I don't have a.
I don't either. Yeah. And so I think the way that I try to approach my writing is to be honest. And this kind of goes into my second book. It's called Overwhelmed and Grateful. And the and in that is super important because I think that the way that we move through life is with honesty and with gratitude. It is being honest about the hard things and looking for the beauty within or around those hard things. And so that is how, with my writing, I have approached being honest with everyone. And I also see so much beauty in the diagnosis. I also see so much of a gift in his diagnosis too. His diagnosis still to this day, there are hard things that come with it. I would say that raising a child with Down syndrome is probably one of the most challenging pieces of my life, if not the most challenging piece. And a lot of those are because of the societal barriers he faces, right?
Yeah, talk a little bit about those.
Sure.
Like, what are some of the things that you find in your day-to-day life that's very hard?
Here's just an example. What we're going through right now is we felt like Anderson, the biggest challenge that we face with him is behavior. And we think he needs behavior therapy. And so we wanted the school to kind of meet with us to do a hybrid schedule where he will go to behavior therapy twice a week. He will go to school 3 times a week. So he's still getting the inclusive part of school where he's around his typically developing peers and his peers with disabilities. And then he's going to go get the specialized therapy. It's not a forever thing. It's just supposed to be like, let's help him with his hardest challenge thing. And the school just said no. And so we're just doing it anyway. Yeah. And we'll just see how it goes. I mean, they ended up extending their attendance policy to be very parent friendly and lenient. And so we're just going to lean into that in the moment. Am I going to get written up for truancy? I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out. Do I hate that I don't know? Absolutely. I wish that schools would just collaborate more with parents. And here's the kicker. We're paying for it. I didn't ask them to pay for it, and I could have. Just so parents listening, if you are in this situation, you absolutely can ask for the school system to pay for a therapy if they don't offer it.
Tim, can't they say this is what he needs? This would make just like if they say he needs some kind of thing to type with because of his handwriting,
That's the argument that we're making, is that his medical doctor is saying, hey, he needs this for his development. And so we just feel like we have the law on our side to just keep going. And maybe they are too scared to worry about servicing him and making sure he gets all of his hours or whatever. So we're just going to keep going. But my point is that shapes everything. The relationship with the school really touches every aspect of our lives with Anderson. And of course, there are other societal barriers as well when it comes to inclusion and extracurricular activities and such.
What about something that you deal with when you're just at home, just being a family? That's made it hard.
I would say our hardest thing at home, I do think it is easier in our home versus outside of our home. But I would say our hardest thing at home is probably just transitioning, you know, like when it's time for the other kids to go to their XYZ curricular or extracurricular activity and getting Anderson on board and like, okay, no, we can't bring 100 cars to soccer practice. Let's try to bring 10, you know, just like those like constant negotiations.
Do you have any tips in your book for parents with kids with Down syndrome on the overwhelmed side or the grateful side?
So what I would say, I wouldn't say it's a tip book. So the way that the book is structured is that there's an Old Testament theologian named Walter Brueggemann, where I was probably one of the most influential books I've ever read was The Spirituality of the Psalms. And the Psalms basically are one of three categories. They're either a psalm of orientation, disorientation, or reorientation. I call that in my book order, disorder, or reorder. Why is that important? Because the Psalms reflect the lives that we have. So we are either in a period of order, disorder, or reorder in our lives oftentimes. Now, order, I would say we're in a period of order right now where things are just kind of humming along. And yet nobody's life is perfect, right? Like you can be in order and have a child with Down syndrome or other significant needs, and you're kind of carrying around this extra backpack, this extra load. The way that I've described, that I prefer to describe how it is to parent a child with Down syndrome is that it's more. It's more paperwork, it's more advocacy, it's more effort. I have typically developing children too, so I believe that I have the right to say that. It just comes with more. And so we're in a period of order, and yet there is this more. And how do we move through that? And for me, the way that I move through that is admitting the hard, not right-siding myself. The way that you mentioned earlier, how people like when you got the diagnosis and they're bright-siding you, right? It's like, oh, it's such a blessing, you know, or saying, oh, but he's doing this and how wonderful that is. And so I don't but myself. I say, this is what we have going on. This is incredibly difficult. And I know that XYZ is also really wonderful, whatever that is. And so it's just it's a practice. It is looking at our lives through an and lens, because the research shows that if we bottle up our emotions, we are more prone to physical and mental issues. I think a Harvard study found that if people who bottle up their emotions are 30% more likely to be afflicted by all medical issues and increase their likelihood of cancer by 70%, right? So we are not meant to hold it all in. And yet there is this other body of research that says practicing gratitude is beneficial for all areas of our lives. So there's a paradox there, right? We're not supposed to bottle up our emotions, and yet we are supposed to practice gratitude. And so how do we deal with that paradox? And I think that is through the tool of and. And when it comes to parenting a child with a disability, it's admitting the more that comes with it. And it's looking for the unique gifts that we have with our children. Our children are unique gifts in themselves. And also, we are living unique lives because of them. Not everybody gets to live this experience. And yes, there are unique challenges, and there are also unique gifts that come with it. And so I think the way that we move forward as parents of kids with disabilities is that we hold both of those realities together. And I think the best way we do that is through the tool of and.
We try to point out the good things. Like we try to say oh, look at this success I'm trying to do that more because our world so much just points out or discusses this happened and this is hard. And instead of always walking around telling people something good that just happened, you know what I mean? We just do that. But I find that it's hard to revel in the gratitude versus the hard, And so the hard is just all the time, And it's, how did you get yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to surrender? Because one of the things you talked about that I could resonate with was you were the kind of person that you had your plan, you worked hard. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get this life. And then bam, it all switches and it changes so much about you. Not, like I'm sure like your friends are probably all doing things that are harder for you to go do now.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard. I guess I'm wondering like what helped you make the shift from like staying in the hard and the sadness and the why did this happen to the I'm going to rely on God and I'm going to believe that this was for a purpose and all of those things that you talk a lot about.
That's kind of going back in my journey. And I would say that for me, those were probably some of the quietest years of my life. I have a bigger personality. Not that it's funny. I'm not like an extremely outgoing person, but I have always been on the stage in some way in my life, whether it was as a performer, as a young person, or as a TV journalist. And then I went from that to writing on the internet. But during that time, I got very quiet. It was a very reflective time. And I think that for me, how I went from total grief to, I will be honest, swung the opposite direction to total gratitude. Like, oh, isn't Down syndrome wonderful, right? To a more honest position, which is there is hard and there is good in this journey and in this diagnosis. Was honestly through that period of getting quiet and for me, I poured myself into study. So that's just how, maybe because I was a journalist, I, was used to reading a lot of research for my stories. And so I went to the books. I went to books on Down syndrome. I also went to a lot of books on faith, and it helped me to deconstruct my preconceived notions about not only Down syndrome, but about the makings of a good life. What is a good life, right? And I think before I had Anderson, I thought a good life was a shiny life. I thought it was the getting the college degree and getting the husband and having the career and having children in matching outfits and, just like that Instagram worthy picture. I think I had that in my head, and that was what I thought was a good life. And then you enter this new person into your life that doesn't quite fit that picture. And I don't know, it helped me to realize like how I had gotten so many things in my belief systems, both my faith and just my views of success and worth, so wrong, how they were so tilted. And so it was, I guess how to answer your question is I got quiet and I got into books. And I did the work. I mean, really, and it was years too.
Did you go down the rabbit hole of all the different therapies and vitamins and I'm going to change them and I'm going to fix them and
I think there was some of that.
we're going to fly to and
Yeah.
Did you have any of that?
Never to that extreme, but I did. It was in the beginning. I just talked to Amy Julia Becker. Have you guys talked to her? Are you familiar with her work? She has a 18 or 19-year-old with Down syndrome, and she's an author as well. She has a podcast, and I was telling her, like, if I could go back, I would tell myself I don't have to do all the therapies, I think that you just think like, well, I got to be a good mom and I got to do the best thing for my kid. But there was an element of, we're going to beat this thing. Not like, I don't think I actually thought that, you know what I'm saying? But like, it was kind of an undercurrent. Yeah. It was like an undercurrent. It was like there.
And people kind of put that in my, oh, well, this is the best. You're the best person this could happen for because you love to research and you love health and you're,
Yeah.
And it was my job to make him obviously the best he can be, but it got overwhelming. And one of the things I like to do is when I would look at those Instagram reels with the Down syndrome child that was rocking it, in whatever arena, I would literally reach out to those parents and be like, I'm going to talk to you. What did you do? Give me your formula. I need him to,
Yeah.
And I loved listening to you say, what makes a good life? And I was like you, I had this, same thing, like the whole plan, and that's what life is. And, he's better if he talks better. He's better if he learns better. He's better if he can read. He's, like all those things. And really, like, the does that make all of us happy? And, think about all the classes you took and when do you use them? Like
Yeah.
people want to be around you because they like your being, not because of all the things you did and accomplished. And then with religion, with God, did you always have that going or did you have to learn? My husband tries to tell me all the time, just give it up, surrender. And I'm like, how? How do I know that I did? Why won't, it doesn't feel like he's taking it. It feels like I just keep taking it back and it's still in there.
There's just certain things that resonate with some people that don't resonate with everybody. And that word in particular doesn't really resonate with me either. I do think in my second book, I did talk about that in one chapter. It's called Crying and Grateful. And that was actually having to do with my youngest son, who was diagnosed with posterior urethral valves after Anderson. And there was a point where I did say, I surrendered because what else was I supposed to do? Like in an MRI sheen for an hour, boom, 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 boom on my side, 7 months pregnant, and I'm like, have tears running down the sides of my face. And there are certain points where life brings you to a surrender naturally because there is literally nothing else you can do. But does that verbiage really work with me? No. And I think we're all built different, right? Like obviously you have something in you where you're kind of like me and you're like a pursuer of knowledge. And that's okay. Honestly, that's what I found peace was in that pursuit. And I write in this book that eventually we do have to lay down the why questions. However, I don't think asking why is a bad idea because it leads you closer, not to necessarily the answer, but it leads you to other answers along the way. It's that pursuit of the why that can have you go deeper into your faith than you have before.
Do you have any tips for people dealing with this or any other trauma in their life to get rid of that, whatever, how you're talking about the research that says like, we're going to get these dizzy or stressed out. And I think, well, this is how I was wired. Like not that I want to be stressed out. It just, when things come my way, it just happens in my body. And I wish it wasn't so, but did you have to do anything to eradicate that kind of personality trait or, to maintain your own health and your own well-being?
For any of your listeners familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3. And so what Enneagram 3s do is they spin their realities to make it look better. And thankfully for me, reality had gotten so hard because I had Anderson and then I had a miscarriage and then I had my youngest son with this health issue, right? There was no more spinning left to do. Life was just ridiculously hard. And then after my son was born, between the two of them, they had 18 specialists. What is there left to spin? There is nothing, right? And so it kind of goes back to, I would say because I stopped spinning my reality to look shiny, it made me more honest. Now, in order to not drown in that honesty though, because life was brutal at the time, it was being honest about that and looking for the light every day. Sometimes they might be connected to that direct situation and sometimes it might not. Sometimes I went to 2 doctor's appointments today with a toddler who I'm running after and a baby who's crying in a stroller and a double stroller and I have a bad back and I'm lifting the double, and I have to go pick up the preschooler from preschool. And, but what do I have to be grateful for that day? It's my husband who loves me, who's handing me a glass of wine at the end of the day. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's not like not
Mutually exclusive.
Right. It doesn't have to always be connected to the situation. In the book, at the end of each chapter, I do include like an and reflection prompt where I do connect them. But in life, it doesn't always have to be connected. It is just like for me now, before I sit down to write work every day, that's when I kind of go over my and prayer. It's an and reflection where I tell God, what the hard things are that are weighing me down before I start my day. And I give thanks for something. And those things can be connected. It might not be. It might be that the river is just behind our house is just extra sparkly that day. And it brings me peace to look at it. Right. And so my advice, honestly, it is to live in the and. It's because it's not that the stress that study that I mentioned earlier, it's not that the stress is going to kill us. It's the not being honest about the stress that's going to kill us, right? So, but also, we have to, if we don't look for the light, then we're going to drown in that stress too. And so it's really holding both of those things. It's radical honesty and radical gratitude at the same time.
As a matter of fact, as you were talking, I could feel my blood pressure rising for you with that list that you had, the kids, the doctor's office, who's running, your bad back. And then when you talked about the gratitude, I could actually feel it coming down. So I think that literally what you're probably doing is owning the insanity sometimes of all of this, but you're also releasing in the gratitude. It's probably restoring a sense of a moment of peace, right? In your heart or your soul. So you can see where it would really work.
Did you rely on seeing somebody or doing meditation or?
Oh, I totally should have seen a therapist during that time. But you know, honestly, like at the time we were living in San Antonio, Texas, you guys are probably familiar-ish with the area where we lived. It took me 45 minutes to get to my kids' doctor's appointments every day. We had no family support because we were a military family, right? My husband was in residency. So it was me, myself, and I. And online therapy was maybe, I remember like kind of after getting through that hump, I started to hear advertisements for online therapy. And then at that point, like I didn't feel like I needed it, but I actually did look to get a therapist. I'm like, I literally don't know how to make this work. You know, I don't know how I'm going to spend 45 minutes driving there and to a place where my insurance approved it, you know, all that stuff.
Person has to have the experience that you're going through, in my opinion. People would suggest that to me. I'm like, but unless they have a Down syndrome child and they've walked this walk, them sitting there telling me he's a gift and it's a blessing and what a joy and look at this, you know, great thing. But like if you and I got on the phone for an hour, I'd probably walk away from that conversation being like, oh, okay, I feel better. I complained to you and then you told me something good. And then I was like, okay, but she can tell me something good because she gets it.
There's a part in my first book, I think it's chapter 9. I think it's called Uniquely Qualified, that chapter. And it's about how when you go through something unexpected, you are uniquely qualified to then help somebody who goes through a very similar unexpected thing. So for us as parents of kids with Down syndrome, there really is nobody else we will probably connect to more than other parents with Down syndrome because we are all uniquely qualified to live life together, to step in and to sit with somebody when they just need somebody to sit with, and to also like shine that light to them when they need that ray of hope too.
I liked also how you talked about changing the telescope. I think that was in your first book. The sense was that you were using a different lens.
And I think that's one of the main gifts of experiencing having a child with Down syndrome, is that it does give you a different lens. I don't know how it couldn't. How could you look at the world the same way as you did before you had a child with Down syndrome, right? Because for many of us, probably the three of us on this podcast, you know, who look similar, who have some level of privilege, who probably are financially stable, you know, all of a sudden we are now deeply connected to somebody who is on the very margins of society. How can you not change through that? How can your perspective on life and on other people on the margins, things that you overlooked once you can't anymore?
It just opened my eyes to just others, which I think I was more like what you described in some of your books. Like, because I didn't really know anyone with Down syndrome, and maybe I would feel nervous and look away or not want to stare, but want to say hi, but I don't know if that's offending that, you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah. It gives you a more empathetic lens in which you see people, like to really see people. And maybe you would have thought that's not really a problem, or why can't that person just fix that problem? Or why can't they pull themselves up by their bootstraps? You know?
What would your favorite chapter be in this Overwhelmed and Grateful?
My favorite chapter is the second to last chapter called Life is Not What I Imagined and I'm Grateful. That is where I reference how we finally moved to our forever space, which is here on the Space Coast of Florida. And I was carrying this kind of this ongoing grief that comes with raising a child with Down syndrome, because at the time we were going through some things with Anderson that we had not experienced before. And I say in the book that it's not something I feel comfortable talking about, but I think I expected to get to this place of arrival with raising a child with Down syndrome where things would just I don't know, be normal. Like he would have Down syndrome, but like it would be level. I don't know how else to say that.
You're going to go through puberty with them. And I think about those kind of things in the future. Like, yeah, God, he has to lose his teeth and just everything that he's going to have to go through, like shave him. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a new thing.
Always a new thing. And so I think it was just like, okay, like we had gotten to the dream location. My husband got into this dream practice. I got into the book deal. And I was so grateful. And I had this hard thing going on with Anderson. There was like an ongoing grief about it. And so anyways, in that chapter, I interview an astronaut named Bob Cabana. No, that's not really a typical interview, but because we live on the Space Coast of Florida, there are astronauts who live here. And I happen to have a personal connection to this one. And he just described what it was like to leave planet Earth. He talked about looking out for the first time over the earth, and everything looked so cohesive, right? And you're just amazed by the beautiful creation. And then when you zoom in further, he could see how North Korea was totally dark versus South Korea was lit up, right? He could see oil fields burning from the war taking place in the Middle East at the time. And anyways, the point of the chapter is like the cohesion that he mentioned. That's God's dream for us, right? And yet there is a chaos that we suffer here and a chaos that we create here, right? And my point in it is that there is always going to be hard things in this life that we experience collectively. And that as we experience as individuals, as we experience as parents of kids with disabilities. And there is so much beauty here. Like the fact that the universe is still expanding, right? Why is the universe still expanding? And the only thing I can think of is that it is a metaphor for God is still here. God still creates. God still connects. Love is what is expanding the universe, right? And both of these realities are true. And so life may not be what I imagined it to be in a lot of ways. And life is so very precious. Life is so very beautiful. And it's having gone through an unexpected event. And for me, largely that is having my child with Down syndrome that has taught me those realities, that there is so much suffering and there is so much beauty too. And I think Anderson having a child with Down syndrome gives me the lens to see that more clearly than I ever could.
Beautiful.
I hope that it gives people permission that it is okay to say that you're going through hard things with raising your kid with Down syndrome. Like, it is okay to admit those hard things. It's okay to say, like, there are barriers that your child faces that are really hard for you to deal with and hard for them to deal with. All of that is okay. And it's so important that we recognize the unique gifts that we get to experience because of our children with Down syndrome, and that they get to experience too with having that diagnosis. So yeah.
Everybody buy these books. Jillian Benfield's books.
She's on. I have a website too.
And her latest one is Overwhelmed and Grateful. See everybody. Here we go. And thank you. Thank you for joining us today, Jillian. We appreciate it.
Good luck with all the weather there.
Thank you. Of course, now it's like let up and it's not raining and flooding, but that's how it goes.
Right.
Thanks again. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.